Hi, I'm Anthony Weaver, and this video is something special. I interview my grandfather, Edgar E. Willis, about his book, Civilian in an Ill-Fitting Uniform, a memoir of World War II he penned at 96 years old. This four-part series covers the time before and after he served on the USS Alaska in the Pacific Theater during World War II. Edgar E. Willis is the retired Emeritus Professor of Communication at the University of Michigan, where he also spent 10 years as department chairman. He spent a year in England as a Fulbright scholar, and he has authored or co-authored 5 books about television and radio. In part 1 of the interview, I asked Edgar about his inspiration for the book, the reason for the title, and why he decided to include his life before and after his service. It is my distinct pleasure and great honor to introduce you to Edgar E. Willis and Civilian in an Ill-Fitting Uniform. What was the inspiration for writing this book?
Well, the fact that I went to war, which was a very unusual experience, and I wanted to leave something when I wrote it, mainly so that my children would understand what happened and why I did what I did. And my children, my 8 grandchildren, my 19, soon to be 20 great-grandchildren.
Wow.
And basically it was written for them. And I hope, of course, that it has a wider interest in that, because I think that what I've done in this book is provide a very short course in World War II, because I cover all aspects of the war.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, your memoir about World War II is called Civilian in an Ill-Fitting Uniform.
Right.
Why the title?
Well, there were 3 ways for people to become officers in the Navy, which is where I volunteered my services. One was by going to school, ROTC. Mm-hmm. Another one, of course, was going to the Naval Academy and getting a regular commission. And then there were certain courses set up, I forget, V6 or V12 or whatever, and you had a course of study, and then you were commissioned. And then there was a system where people who had had no military experience because of their civilian standing mm-hmm. were commissioned, and I was one of those. So I was converted from a civilian, a real civilian, with no military training or experience whatsoever, into a naval officer overnight.
Wow.
And I immediately found myself in a new kind of world.
All right. Well, you mentioned ROTC. That's where it all got started. For people who don't know, what is ROTC?
That's the course of study that students in college take to get military training.
Oh, okay. That's where you get started.
I forget what ROTC stands for, but it's for those students.
Okay.
And when they get finished, they become officers.
And you've already mentioned what I like about this book, what I find interesting about the memoir. It's not just your time on the USS Alaska. It's a lot about your life before and after your commission. Why did you decide to include so much before and after your commission and not just make it about the USS Alaska?
Well, I wasn't the only one who volunteered my services. When I volunteered the services of my wife, Zella. And she had to do a lot of things because I was in the Navy that she wouldn't have had to do. Oh. And I also wanted the readers of the book, and my descendants too, for whom I've specifically written, to understand why I had volunteered. Why had I given this opportunity to the Navy to use my services?
Oh, okay.
So that involved talking about my background in my civilian life, and what kind of a civilian I was.
Mm-hmm. In the beginning of the book, you talk about feeling responsible to your nation, and you felt it was your duty to help in the war effort. It comes through very, very clear. Can you explain that, your feelings at that time?
At the time that I considered volunteering for the Navy, I was working for the Board of Education in Detroit, Michigan. And I was writing scripts about various things that were broadcast to children in school, which I thought was a worthwhile endeavor, but it wasn't making any direct contribution to the war effort. And at the time that these thoughts went through my mind, we were in very great straits. The historians now say that it was inevitable that the might of the United States and Great Britain and the other allies would eventually prevail. But it wasn't that obvious back in
then.
1942 and 1943. Hitler was roaming through all of Europe. He had apparently decided not to invade England, but he had taken control of the Middle East and Africa, and Japan, that had bombed us at Pearl Harbor in December 1941, was running rampant in the Pacific, and everywhere it went, it was winning battles and winning territory. And it did not look good for the United States and the Allies.
So you really felt...
Well, I felt that maybe I could make a more direct contribution than I was making as a civilian.
Do you feel like back then that you weren't the only one that felt this way? A lot of Americans really wanted to get out there.
I'm sure there were, yeah.
There are many great stories in the book that either resulted from pure luck or coincidence, circumstances of the moment. What are a couple of your favorite stories about this pure luck or coincidences? A couple favorite stories.
Well, I think one of my favorite stories, when I went in, after I was commissioned, after I was a naval officer, then I was trained. I received training, and I received training in how to march, so that when the commanding officer gave an order, you didn't go off in that direction while the rest of the platoon went off in another, and I learned to do that pretty well. Well, it happened that 8 months after that training had been completed, for some reason or other, and I don't remember the circumstances, I was asked to command a platoon in the 4th of July parade in the city of Philadelphia, where our ship was being fitted out for the Navy, and I had never had any experience giving orders to a platoon. I had taken orders, but there's a big difference between taking orders and giving orders. and I don't know why I was picked. But anyway, when I got there, I looked down and I hoped that there weren't any turns, because I'd forgotten how to give the command to make a turn. And what happened was chaos. I kept hoping we'd go straight, but unfortunately we had to make a turn, and I had no idea what kind of an order. And the platoon ended up in the arms of the spectators, all of who were laughing loudly and laughing at me and just enjoying, and my platoon, of course, was enjoying it fully. And then I remembered a script I had written about Abraham Lincoln, and like me, he was an officer in a war. I forget what the war was, but he was a civilian in an ill-fitting uniform, just as I was. And he came up, and he had a platoon he was companion. He came up to a fence with a little door through it, and he had no idea how to get. So he said, "Platoon dismissed, reform on the other side." So what I did was I said, "Platoon dismissed, reform along the curve." and from then on there weren't any more turns, so I got out of it.
So basically, everybody goes down the street, and basically you run into the spectators.
Well, we were supposed to turn.
Right, and so as you're supposed to turn, but you don't know how to make them go right.
Yeah.
They disperse to and your quick reaction was disperse and reform.
Not quick. Probably delayed a little to figure out what to do. Anyway, that was one of the experiences. And that was one that after it was over, I could laugh about.
In part 2, Edgar will read from his memoir, Civilian in an Ill-Fitting Uniform. Now don't forget, go to www.edgarewillis.com and check out his book and video series, How to Be Funny on Purpose. Also, get your copy of Civilian in an Ill-Fitting Uniform at www.edgarewillis.com. That's www.edgarewillis.com.